was a popular high school teen with a big heart.
He was loved by everybody. He was there for anybody, anytime.
He was a really likable and caring person.
Until his life was violently stolen while he slept.
It was unbelievable because I was trying to figure out what was going on.
We pretty much are starting with a blank slate.
It was really a whodunit. Don't have a lot of answers.
Detectives unearth a world of deceit and intimidation.
She said if he would have just kept his mouth shut, this never would have happened.
There were two teenagers bragging about being connected with a homicide.
He was already in custody, so was this something that he had orchestrated?
To reveal a sinister plot.
A fisherman contacted the police department and said, hey, I found this gun.
So that was a twist where you never would have expected that.
The whole scenario was crazy.
And discover a mastermind no one expected.
We were dumbfounded, like, what just happened here?
I don't think anybody thought that this is how it would end.
I felt totally betrayed. I wasn't just shocked. I was floored.
Set against the picturesque backdrop of the Oregon mountains, the small town of Eugene is 100 miles south of Portland.
The community is nice. It's a good place to raise a family. It's a college community. The University of Oregon is there. It's a beautiful area of the Pacific Northwest.
Eugene's a small town, relatively. We're like the second or third largest city in Oregon, but that's still about 200,000 people. It's a quiet place.
In the early morning hours on Monday, October 3rd, 1994, the serenity of this close-knit community is shattered.
A 911 call was made. It was a mother who was in anguish. Her teenage son had been seriously injured, bleeding from his head.
Emergency units race to the home, arriving in a matter of minutes.
When the first responders arrived, they were able to quickly assess that it was a gunshot wound to the head. And although he was unconscious, he was still alive.
As paramedics battle to save the teen, police arrive to investigate the shooting. Janice Itura identifies the victim as her 18-year-old son, Aaron Itura.
Aaron Itura was almost immediately transported to the hospital.
As detectives get to work, they need to determine who would shoot a teenage boy and why.
In short order, we're preserving the scene, beginning to document it with photographs, and start gathering information. His bedroom had been partitioned off inside the attached garage of the residence. He had furnished it or decorated it as, typical teen male would. He had been in bed asleep with a girl that he was dating at the time. We knew he had sustained a devastating gunshot wound to the head.
The girlfriend who was lying beside him was unharmed. Police ask her to wait with the family while they continue to investigate the crime scene.
And a fragment of the bullet was found at the scene. It seemed like the caliber of the gun was a .38 caliber.
The weapon is nowhere to be found, and there's no sign of forced entry to the home.
Somebody had just opened the garage door. It wasn't locked.
There's nothing of value missing. Detectives wonder if the attacker could have a personal motive.
If somebody had a gun and they went in there to steal property, but the people woke up and discovered them, you would expect both people to be shot. The fact that one person wasn't shot and the other one was would indicate that there's a motive to single that person out.
With the crime scene yielding little information, detectives question those closest to Aaron, his family and girlfriend, who were at the scene of the crime.
I mean, it was a really whodunit out of the blue. Don't have a lot of answers.
The police department were still trying to figure out what happened and who was involved.
The detective questions how Janice came to find Aaron.
Aaron had gone to his room, and his girlfriend and Carrie was spending the night. And then all of a sudden, about 1:30 in the morning, I hear screaming. So I went out to the bedroom, and here's Aaron on the bed, and his girlfriend Carrie's just freaked out. And I looked at Aaron, and he had a big old gash on his head. Then I saw blood. And I called 911, and then I just grabbed him and held him for a while. I was trying to figure out what happened.
Aaron Itura was born on December 28, 1975. He was the oldest of 5 children, raised by single mom Janice.
Aaron was a good kid. He was there for anybody, anytime. And he had a lot of responsibilities as far as helping out, because I worked sometimes 2 jobs, and he took care of all of his young siblings.
Growing up, Aaron was always tall for his age and came to be known as a gentle giant.
People described him a big, lovable teddy bear. He was a really likable and caring person with a mom who was really involved in his life.
In his last year of high school, Aaron was popular, well-respected, and easygoing.
Well, he liked to draw. He wanted to go to art school in New York, and that was his goal.
Recently, Aaron had found love with a local girl named Carrie.
She worked at the little neighborhood store, and they had been dating about 4 or 5 months.
Aaron took pride in his community and was highly active in the area's anti-gang movement.
He had the courage to step up and do what was right. He was just the type of guy that people came to with their problems. He was the protector. He watched out for everybody.
Aaron was looking ahead to a bright future. No one can think of anyone who'd want to shoot this young man point blank in his own bed. Investigators turned to Aaron's girlfriend, Carrie, who was lying next to him during the attack. Carrie tells detectives she awoke to the sound of the gunshot, but couldn't see much in the dark.
Carrie, the girlfriend, certainly needs to be looked at as a potential suspect because of her proximity at the time the shooting occurs.
The police decided to take her down to the police station and to talk to her in a lot more detail about what she knew.
While police transfer Carrie to the station, detectives focus on Aaron's family.
In the early stages, it's really important to exclude witnesses from being possible suspects. Part of the procedure of the police was to take gunshot residue swabs from the people in the house.
I needed to get to the hospital. I needed to see how he was. But we couldn't leave. We had to wait till we were cleared through the gunpowder residue testing.
Aaron's mom and siblings test negative for gunshot residue. They immediately race to the hospital.
Janice was almost immediately notified by a doctor that her son's brain scans showed that there was no brain activity.
The nurse was trying to tell me that, he's not going to make it.
Later that morning, the decision is made to take Aaron off life support.
I think he just was done fighting. I lost a big chunk of my heart. I just couldn't believe that I'll never see him again.
As Aaron's family grieve their devastating loss, at the station, detectives interview Aaron's girlfriend, Carrie. They ask her if she knows of anyone who would want to harm Aaron.
She claimed she didn't know why this occurred and who would have a motive to have killed him.
When detectives question Carrie about trouble in their relationship, she denies any problems.
Maybe she just wasn't being straight or truthful. Right off, you can't rule out the possibility that someone like Carrie may have shot Aaron for some personal motive.
Forensics check Carrie's hands and clothing to determine if she fired the weapon that killed Aaron.
Gunshot residue wasn't there. Swabs confirmed that she was not involved in a shooting.
With Carrie ruled out as the shooter, police ask her if anything unusual happened that night. She tells police about a mysterious phone call Aaron received just hours before the crime.
Carrie had mentioned a call had been made to the house. It was some girl, just wanting to know if Aaron was there. And then the caller hung up.
Investigators have Carrie walk them through the moments before Aaron was shot.
She said she was laying next to him. They were both fast asleep when she was awakened by some noise, which, as it turns out, was the gunshot.
Then, Carrie reveals a crucial detail.
Carrie becomes a key part of the investigation. She mentioned that she had seen who did it.
Coming up, the investigation takes a stunning turn.
What we learned indicated that they knew a lot more about what happened than what they'd said originally.
And unravels a tale of betrayal.
And I'm just like, did I just hear her say what I think I heard her say?
There was almost something pathological about their relationship.
To reveal a ruthless killer hiding in plain sight.
They were absolutely a master manipulator.
It was what they call Jekyll and Hyde.
It was really shocking how the case turned.
Police are investigating the murder of 18-year-old Aaron Itura, gunned down in his sleep. Aaron's girlfriend Carrie is the sole eyewitness to the crime, and police are hoping she can provide them with a lead.
The police department are still trying to figure out what is the reason why he would be singled out and killed.
Detectives continue to question Carrie about the details surrounding the murder.
Carrie provided information to the police that it was two killers. She believed they had their faces covered with bandanas and their hands covered, so she could not get a good description of them. She was able to identify them as young males, but not much beyond that.
But who could the two masked assailants be? Police ask Carrie if she can think of anyone in her recent past who would want to harm Aaron.
She might have had a jealous ex-boyfriend who might have had a grudge against Aaron that she would have been aware of. And so we were exploring all of those avenues to find any potential connections.
After interviewing Carrie, police dig into her background and find no serious ex-boyfriend or anyone else that could link to the crime. With no significant leads, investigators turn to the community for help.
We pretty much are starting with a blank slate. The police had kind of fanned out, into the community and were asking people whether they knew anything about what had happened to Aaron Itura.
But no one heard or saw anything suspicious. For this laid-back community, news of Aaron's brutal murder is a shock.
All we knew was this young man had been sleeping in his bed and somebody had gotten in there and shot and killed him. We were dumbfounded, like, what just happened here? This is Eugene, Oregon. You don't have young people being killed right in their home, in their bedroom while they're sleeping. And people were scared.
Detectives begin to look at Aaron's work with the anti-gang group. Had he made some dangerous enemies?
Law enforcement was certainly concerned about gang activity. There was a sense, anyway, that Aaron, he's been at these anti-gang task force meetings, and now this kid has been shot in the head. So it certainly raises questions.
Police learned that Aaron had been working closely with local anti-gang activist Mary Thompson.
A lot of people knew who Mary Thompson was. She was wanting to sound the alarm about gangs in Eugene. And she established herself as kind of the citizen voice among law enforcement and other agencies dealing with that. She was a working mom with a teen, her son Bo, who was getting in and out of trouble.
Mary Thompson was involved in publicizing the threat of gangs. How that developed for her was that her son Bo, who was 16 and had gotten involved in some gang activity and serious crimes.
She said he's a member of a local Crip gang, and if it can happen in my family, it can happen in any families. And oftentimes she was going to various schools and in the media for an anti-gang sentiment.
Mary's home was open to troubled teens trying to avoid gang life, but she needed help with her expanding network.
Aaron got approached in school about assisting with the community outreach. He took that role seriously.
Aaron was very proud. Sometimes I could hear him talking to his sisters about, I've got to do this. I'm going to help some kid someday, and Mary's on the right track. I thought she was amazing. Here's a woman that's 40-some years old, and she is out with Aaron, making people aware, because most people in this town had no idea that this was going on.
The day after the murder, investigators pay Mary a visit, looking for a lead.
She was shocked that Aaron Itura had been shot and killed, and more than willing to try to help in any way that she could. She offered a whole list of names of people that she knew were associated with him.
Then, Mary shares a disturbing detail.
When the police went to talk to Mary Thompson, she told them about a gang member from Portland that was a Crip that had stopped by her house looking for Aaron Itura before the homicide. And she identified him by the name of Sonny and said what kind of car he was driving. And this gang was dangerous.
He wasn't somebody that she previously knew, just that he had showed up and was inquiring about Aaron. Where does he live and what can you tell me about him, sort of thing. Her information is that people in the gang life up in Portland were upset because of Aaron's cooperation in anti-gang efforts. Given the proximity of when this had occurred to Aaron's death, you couldn't ignore that this might all be coming out of people in Portland. She provided a general description of Sonny and of a car that he was driving. He wasn't on our radar. So the information about Sonny was documented and passed on and shared with the Portland Gang Bureau.
While Portland's gang unit tracked down Sonny, Eugene police talked with Aaron's friends. Had Aaron been concerned for his own safety before the murder?
They said before the homicide, Aaron Itura told them a story about a gang member wanting to do harm to him. But there's not a lot of information.
This could be significant. This might, in fact, be gang-related. So we were looking for the active gang member of Sonny.
Less than 36 hours after Aaron Itura is found shot in his bed, investigators believe the cold-blooded murder of the teen could be tied to his work in an anti-gang group. According to Aaron's mentor, Mary Thompson, a gang member named Sonny had been looking for him.
The result of the inquiry with Portland has come back and they came up blank. They had no information about any Sonny. The car description didn't match anything in their files. So it was a big zero. They were saying, we don't have anything. So as a result of that, we were frustrated that we didn't have a suspect.
Then, detectives received the autopsy results.
Aaron sustained a fatal gunshot wound to the head, and it was a single shot.
It was an aim shot with a .38 caliber to the back of the head that would go through the brain, would have almost 100% chance of causing the death of the person that was hit.
48 hours into the case, with few clues to investigate, the pressure on police increases.
There's a sense of uncertainty and unease, that can permeate the community if you don't solve this crime, if it remains unsolved.
When you're in a small community, you want some answers because somebody out there in the town we live in snuck into the bedroom of this young man and killed him. That's scarier than anything when you don't know any other details.
The lack of progress also takes a toll on Aaron's family.
There was times that I would have been willing to follow Aaron, but I put my grief on the back burner. Continue taking care of my kids because it's not their fault. But it was so hard with just certain songs, certain times. I just would kind of collapse. It's just kind of what you do.
Fortunately, Janice isn't without support. Friends like Aaron's mentor, Mary, help the family get through tough times.
Mary Thompson was very sorry. She couldn't understand who would ever do that. We both were grieving. So I got some really nice words from her. I'm in the mindset of, well, we're going to catch who did this, who shot him. And she's like agreeing with me, yeah, we need to find out who did this.
At the station, police search for new leads and find a report about a recent incident involving Aaron and are surprised when they come across a familiar name.
Mary Thompson's son, whose name was Bo Flynn, was connected to this case. He was 16 years old. Bo had been involved in the juvenile system before for his violence and criminal activity. He was empowered and emboldened by dangerous crime.
We learned that Mary asked Aaron to keep an eye out for Bo and try to steer him clear of trouble. The plan was just simply for Aaron to spend time with Bo, be a positive influence.
But instead of Bo moving away from trouble, he drags Aaron into it. 3 weeks before the murder, they have a dangerous encounter.
Bo and Aaron were in West Eugene and encountered some other youths. And one of them had some prior issue with Bo. Bo suspected that this kid had snitched him off, or they got into an argument or whatever it might be. The confrontation escalated. Bo, who was carrying a knife, produced the knife and ended up cutting the other kid. Patrol officers arrived and they both were arrested.
Aaron went to the Lane County Jail. They had to go down and get him. And I was so mad at him that I said, "You're responsible for your actions." But he did know right from wrong. And he was not afraid to stand up for what was right.
Then, Aaron makes a risky decision to testify against Bo. Aaron was killed on October 3rd, just 2 days before he was due to give his witness statement. Was this the reason for Aaron's murder?
We consider the possibility that Bo was involved in the killing, especially as this potential motive emerged that Aaron was a witness in a pending case against Bo that would result in him being incarcerated potentially 3 or 4 years.
Investigators pay a visit to Bo, who's in custody at the state's juvenile facility for the knife assault.
He was already in custody at the time that the homicide occurred, so was this something that Bo had orchestrated?
When detectives interview Bo Flynn and ask him what happened, Bo Flynn says, "I didn't do anything, I don't know anything about it."
At the time, there wasn't any credible information that developed that suggested that he had orchestrated this crime.
The police don't have any evidence that gives Bo's role in the commission of this murder.
Having lost Bo as a viable suspect, detectives are at risk of hitting a standstill in the case. But then, Aaron's mom contacts police with a disturbing new lead.
I told him that somebody heard a couple of other people at the high school were talking about how they were going to take care of the big guy, and we all knew the big guy was Aaron because he was the biggest kid at Willamette High School.
We also were hearing rumors that there were 2 young gang members involved in the community bragging about being connected with a homicide.
Police dig deeper into these rumors, turning to Aaron's friends for more details.
When we're talking to kids that were associated with Aaron, we're just trying to find out, what do you know and who could have done this? Jim Elstad and Joe Brown had been identified as part of this loose-knit group of kids that were often frequenting the Thompson residence. And they were kind of on the fringe. The information persisted that both admitted and talked about the murder itself. They were saying that they had done the killing. They were proud of what they'd done. These kids needed to be contacted. Even as we were working, it was really shocking how the case turned.
Police investigating the execution-style shooting of 18-year-old Aaron Itura have a new lead. 2 local teens have been bragging about the killing.
What the word was on the street was Joseph Brown and James Elstad were the 2 individuals involved in the killing of Aaron Itura.
I knew they were friends of Bo's, but these kids were Aaron's friends as well. Jim Elstad grew up with my kids. His little brother was my daughter's best friend. And hearing that he would even be involved was just bizarre. But that's what they were saying.
We were told from the circle of kids that were being identified and contacted said that Jim Elstad and Aaron Itura had been friends at one time, and that most recently, leading up to the homicide, that relationship had soured. So, a source of friction that should be explored and investigated.
Joe Brown and Jim Elstad, they didn't appear to have criminal records, so there wasn't a whole lot to go on.
Before police can speak to the 2 teens, they get a surprise visit from Mary Thompson.
She indicated that she also heard that Joseph Brown and Jim Elstad might have been involved in the homicide.
But what Mary reveals next stuns the detective.
The homicide happened on October 3rd in the early morning hours, and she tells the police that both Elstad and Brown ended up coming to her house after the homicide and telling her that they had killed Itura.
Acknowledged that she hadn't been entirely candid with us from the beginning. Her explanation for that was, well, I just didn't believe him. I just couldn't imagine them doing it. I wasn't seeing anything in their demeanor that suggests that they had done this homicide, and so I didn't volunteer that information up front because I didn't think it was credible at the time.
But now Mary believes the two teens could have been telling the truth. Armed with this new information, police bring Jim Elstad and Joe Brown to the station for questioning.
When they were interviewed, both of them denied any knowledge of the homicide. Elstad and Brown had agreed to take polygraphs as a way to clear themselves of suspicion. And so they were each polygraphed that same day, and both flunked.
Detectives grill the teens for hours, and eventually they break down and confess.
Brown and Elstad finally acknowledged that they had been involved and had done the homicide.
To understand how Aaron Itura was killed that night, police have Joseph Brown recreate the murder at the crime scene.
He had agreed to come back and do what we call a walkthrough, where you're basically doing a videotaped statement and you're describing, and in some instances you might even enact, what occurred.
Joe tells police he was the lookout, and Jim Elstad was the one who shot Aaron. But what was their motive?
Gradually what emerged was they were upset because their homie, Bo, was at risk of being incarcerated further because Aaron was cooperating with the police and was willing to testify against him in this knife incident.
In their statements, Joseph Brown and James Elstad took personal responsibility for the homicide. They did not say that their activities were at the direction of Bo.
Detectives need something concrete to corroborate their story, so they ask about the murder weapon. When police ask Joe Brown what happened to the gun, he tells them it's in the river.
After the homicide, Joseph Brown throws the gun into the river to dispose of it.
Police search the river for the gun, but can't find it.
The fact emerged, that we were looking for the weapon. A fisherman contacted the police department and said, hey, I don't know if it's connected or not, but I was fishing that stretch of the river and I found this gun. So a patrol officer is sent out and takes possession of the gun from him and books it into evidence. They then do a ballistic check on the gun and they find out it was consistent with the murder weapon.
You have their confession and you've got the murder weapon, so you can corroborate their confession to the point where the conviction of those two people is solid.
On October 6, 1994, Jim Elstad and Joe Brown are arrested for the murder of 18-year-old Aaron Itura.
It was very hard to find out. Jim Elstad shot Aaron while he was sleeping. It was just unbelievable.
After the arrests, Aaron's mentor, Mary Thompson, reaches out to Janice.
Mary called me. First it was like, well, we need to get together, maybe have a coffee, and I'll buy you lunch. And then she said, if Aaron would have just kept his mouth shut, this never would have happened. And I'm just like, did I just hear her say what I think I heard her say? At that point, I got real concerned. So I called Detective Rainey and told him what happened.
What we learned indicated that Mary knew a lot more about what happened than she had said originally.
For police, Mary's alarming statement is one of many things they are now questioning.
Initially, it was thought to just be this homicide that had been committed by these two guys, but there was just this overriding perception that she was more involved than she had admitted.
Less than a week after 18-year-old Aaron Itura was shot to death in his bed, Former friends Jim Elstad and Joe Brown are charged with his murder. But now, the actions of Aaron's anti-gang mentor, Mary Thompson, have detectives thinking the case is far from over.
Mary Thompson's behavior had been raising some red flags.
She failed to mention that Brown and Elstad came to her house that night. It was just a convenient fact that she forgot to mention. And she also had made a call to Janice. That was actually unusual, suspicious in nature.
At that point, the police decided to take her down to the police station and to talk to her in more detail.
Investigators want to know why Mary withheld information surrounding Aaron's murder.
In that interview, she talks about being extremely angry with Aaron Itura after he informed on her son about the knife fight. But she didn't want him to be killed.
Do we know for sure that she's implicated in the murder? No. Can we prove it at that time? No.
Since police lack solid evidence that Mary is involved, they let her go. With the killers behind bars, Aaron's loved ones gathered to say their final farewells.
It was one beautiful, beautiful day. High school kids, teachers, counselors, they all showed up. Mary was there as well. And there was probably 2,000 people. People I didn't even know were there. Aaron was loved by everybody.
5 days after the arrest of Aaron's murderers, police are still troubled by Mary Thompson's unusual behavior, so they dig deeper into her past.
10 or 15 years prior, there was some other events in Josephine County, which is a county in southern Oregon. She had identified herself as being a person that was working as an assistant to prosecuting the drug trade. And it turned out that she was a methamphetamine manufacturer at that time, and that she got caught selling methamphetamine. Looking at Mary Thompson's past, she was engaged in criminal activity. It was definitely shocking. She was a crime fighter that the community trusted that had engaged in that kind of behavior. So that was a twist where you never would have expected that.
Mary's history proves she's capable of lying and manipulating to get what she wants. Now investigators wonder what she's capable of in connection to this case.
As we knew and learned more about her, it was pretty eye-opening, shocking even to investigators. Part of the picture that emerged about Mary was her relationship with her son, Beau, and how protective she had been of him.
She'd had a bunch of relationships in her life that had not turned out, and the only one that stayed with her was Beau Flynn, her son. And so she was willing to do things that were antisocial and illegal in order to maintain Beau's relationship with her. She viewed herself as being a peer. Instead of directing her son to be a law-abiding citizen, she chose to get in the criminal gutter with him.
There was almost, I'm no expert, but almost something pathological about their relationship in terms of what a parent will do to protect their child.
She knew that Aaron was the only thing standing between her and her son's charges.
After Beau, the only person that had motive to eliminate Itura as a witness was Mary Thompson.
Detectives start questioning the teens Mary claims she's been keeping out of gangs.
When we're talking to kids that were identified as having frequented the Thompson residence, they weren't involved in school, they didn't have healthy relationships, they were all kind of lacking something in their life and felt that. It seemed that she already had developed the family structure that she was able to manipulate for her own purposes, and she had somehow orchestrated the murder of Aaron Itura, and as a result of that, she began emerging more and more as this prime suspect.
But could Mary go so far as to have Aaron killed?
To advance this investigation, the idea came up about doing a wiretap to see if something was being said here that could be used to either eliminate Mary from suspicion or would lead to evidence to convict her of murder.
On the wiretap, detectives hear Mary's son, Beau, who's on parole, discussing gang activities with other gang members.
They called themselves the 74 Hoover Crips.
They were involved in selling drugs and stealing property. We were thinking it was possible Bo was in charge of the gang.
Just when investigators think Bo is the gang leader, someone else comes on the line.
It became quickly apparent that Mary was calling the shots. She was pressuring people to do stuff.
Mary Thompson's role in the gang is definitely as a leader.
They heard Mary planning robberies, beatings, car thefts, just a hive of criminal activity.
Mary Thompson, in her exchanges, in these intercepted phone calls, clearly is talking the talk. I mean, she knows the lingo, the street language, and she's a very legitimate threat. She tells them she's got connections outside of Eugene even that, if need be, she can marshal to come in and start dealing with people.
But nothing links Mary directly to Aaron's murder until she makes a telling statement.
There's a conversation that she has with a gang member, and she says, "Don't worry, I haven't screamed at you, have I? Aaron Itura got screamed at before he got whacked. He knew how I felt." So she essentially admits to the gang killing Itura.
We ripped off the veneer of her being this concerned mom who only immersed herself in this culture out of concern for her son. Facts that we're developing were pretty revealing.
Though the admission is damning, detectives know they'll need more to secure a conviction.
We felt that we needed a direct witness who would tell us about all these conversations that happened up and including the homicide of Aaron Itura. Our tactic was to break the gang, essentially, and to see what we could do about getting them to testify against Mary Thompson.
In the cold-blooded killing of Aaron Itura, police have arrested 2 young gang members. Now, wiretaps have revealed Aaron's anti-gang mentor, Mary Thompson, is actually a ruthless gang leader.
Mary Thompson became a prime suspect in the case, and the wiretaps were really instrumental in revealing the extent of the influence that Mary had.
Investigators are now convinced Mary is behind the 18-year-old's murder. But to charge her, they need additional evidence.
We arrested the gang for all of these crimes that they committed that we knew about during the wire, whether it was committing a burglary or stealing weapons.
Investigators then question the teen gang members, hoping to get them to flip on Mary. The prosecutor thinks their best shot lies with one of the youngest members of the gang, named Lisa.
We decided that we were going to give Lisa immunity on the condition that she testified about the gang and about the homicide of Aaron Itura.
Lisa agrees to tell investigators everything she knows.
It became pretty clear not only was Mary the leader of the gang, but when it came to eliminating Itura, the behavior of Elstad and Brown was guided by her.
Mary was always saying that something's got to be done about Aaron. We can't let him testify against Bo, and that shifted to actually killing him.
From Lisa's account of Aaron's murder, the missing pieces fall into place.
The Friday before the homicide, there's a big meeting of the gang at Mary Thompson's house. Mary encouraged Jim Elstad to commit the homicide. On the night of the murder, Lisa's role is that she is the one that calls Itura's residence. And when Itura answers the phone, she hangs up on him. And that information gets communicated back to Jim Elstad and Joseph Brown that Itura is at his house and they should go forward and commit the crime.
Mary tells Brown and Elstad to wait until everyone in the Itura home is asleep.
1:30 in the morning, when Aaron was in bed with a girlfriend, Carrie, they were both fast asleep. Brown and Elstad had snuck into the room, and Joe Brown was the lookout. And then Jim Elstad hadn't hesitated and fired once into Aaron's head. Carrie then was awakened by that noise. By then, Elstad and Brown had fled the garage. They go to Mary Thompson's house after having committed the homicide, and then Joe Brown gets taken to the river, and Mary Thompson takes him there to dispose of the gun. And this is kind of significant. That was even done at her suggestion.
At the outset of the investigation, Mary Thompson went to police with information on Brown and Elstad in an attempt to throw police off her trail.
Throughout all this, of course, Mary's trying to keep her fingerprints off of everything, so she's evading responsibility. But her influence, it resulted in Aaron Itura's death.
Mary Thompson was absolutely a master manipulator. That was demonstrated many, many times.
In February 1995, Mary is charged with aggravated homicide for her role in killing Aaron Itura.
I was floored. I just had no idea that Mary could have been involved at that extent. It was just what they call Jekyll and Hyde, you know. I felt totally betrayed by another mom.
I don't think anybody suspected when she was teaching us about gangs that she actually was planning the whole thing.
Everybody was trying to do the right thing by her and her crusades, and her telling me how amazing my son was, and the idea that he would go out and help her and then find out that she would have murdered my son herself.
In December 1994, Joe Brown and Jim Elstad received 10 and 16 years respectively after pleading guilty to the murder of Aaron Itura. Almost 2 years later, on June 4th, 1996, Mary Thompson goes to trial and pleads not guilty. Gang members testify in court, supporting the prosecution's case.
They all eventually, came on board and were effective witnesses.
After a 6-week trial, on July 23rd, 1996, the jury finds 41-year-old Mary Thompson guilty for her role in the murder of Aaron Itura.
It's been such an emotional trauma on us all. It's not only me that she's hurt, it's not only my son that she's destroyed, it's my family, his friends, the kids involved, everybody.
She's probably been doing this her whole life, but she didn't win.
Mary Thompson is sentenced to life in prison for aggravated murder, among other charges, including hindering the prosecution.
When you think of the level of deception that she perpetrated and then ultimately to see her held responsible for that, that's a real satisfying feeling as an investigator. The whole case from beginning to end was unsettling. I don't think anybody would have gone into it thought that this is how it would end.
Aaron's loved ones find relief in the closing of that dark chapter in their lives. They try their best to move forward, but thoughts of the good-natured 18-year-old are never far away.
I talked to him daily, but my family was a whole unit. You got one spoke missing. He was the protector. I always feel he's here. He's around us. He still had the courage to do the right thing. And he did the right thing in the end, even though it cost him his life.
A woman enjoying retirement after a lifetime of hard work.
My mother did very well for herself. She was a very strong-willed woman.
Nina was quirky. I can't tell you how much she loved frogs and Elvis Presley and country music. She just marched to her own drum and did her thing.
Found brutally murdered in her home.
He stabbed her 24 times. There was blood throughout the house. It's like living in a bad horror movie.
A dangerous predator eludes police.
She had been sexually assaulted. Our victim potentially knew who the suspect was.
I kept asking them, is this going to be a cold case? And they kept telling me, we're not done yet.
DNA evidence leads to a shocking realization.
It was a match to another murder.
The thought that we had a serial killer here in town scared the hell out of me.
And a suspect no one saw coming.
To call this an unexpected killer is an understatement.
That's like every person's nightmare.
It hit me like a ton of bricks.
Kansas City is a large metropolitan area on the border between Kansas and Missouri.
Kansas City can be a very fun place to be. We love our sports in this city. It's a very friendly place to live.
Nothing seems out of the ordinary on October 29th, 2010, until Kansas City police receive a 911 call about a woman found unresponsive in her home.
A woman called police and said she discovered her mother at the bottom of the basement stairs, and she checked her for vital signs and found she was dead.
When the first officer arrives on the scene, the caller leads them to her 75-year-old mother, Nina Whitney.
I showed them my mother's body laying at the bottom of the stairs. I told the police officers I believe she had just dropped over from a heart attack. And then I called my cousin Kim.
The phone rang and I picked it up, and Paige told me my mother is dead. Paige said she thought maybe Aunt Nina fell down the stairs going to the garage.
While Paige speaks with her cousin on the phone, police take a closer look at Nina's body.
Nina was face down, and there was a shelving unit there with a bunch of glass frogs, and a lot of those frogs had fallen off the shelf on top of her. It initially looks like an accident and a natural death, but when they rolled the victim over, they discovered several stab wounds in her chest. And also what were determined were defensive wounds on her hands, which is something that we see when someone fights back.
Clearly, this is no accident, and detectives arrive to begin a homicide investigation.
When someone's stabbed like the victim was, it usually means there's some sort of emotion tied there, because you're actually stabbing someone instead of just shooting them or something like that. Her blouse had been pulled up, and there were buttons missing, and they quickly discovered that they're what they believed to be saliva on her breast, which they swabbed. So it felt like this was sort of a sexual in nature homicide.
Police inform Paige that her mother has been murdered.
I don't think I've ever been that stunned in my entire life. It's so surreal. It's like living in a bad horror movie. I don't know how to describe it. You're just totally and completely stunned.
A lifelong native of the Midwest, Nina Whitney was a woman with humble roots.
My mother was born in South Dakota, and then their family wound up here in Kansas City in the late 40s, early 50s. My mother had a very rough life. My mom's mom left their family, so my mom was left to take care of her younger siblings. She married my father, and my parents divorced when I was about 9 years old. My father left her pretty much destitute, so it was just the two of us. And we struggled tremendously. My mother worked some very hard jobs, and we lived on food stamps.
Eventually, Nina found a stable, well-paying career.
She worked on the assembly line at General Motors here in Kansas City. She managed to buy a house, and she did very well for herself. She was a very strong-willed woman.
Nina wanted a better life for her daughter and encouraged Paige to get an education.
I went into criminal justice at Central Missouri State University, and I was a probation parole officer for 25 years. The older I became, the closer my mother and I became. We spent a tremendous amount of time together. My mother started collecting frogs back in the mid-70s. Ceramic, glass, dishes, clothes, bedding, towels. The entire house was filled, wall to wall, floor to ceiling, with frogs.
Nina's favorite hobby earned her the nickname, the Frog Lady.
Nina was quirky. I can't tell you how much she loved frogs and Elvis Presley and country music. She just marched to her own drum and did her thing.
Investigators are stunned that someone would viciously attack this 75-year-old woman in her home.
I was in total shock, truly. She was in her house, minding her own business, not doing anything wrong. Like, how on earth did that happen?
When I found out Nina had been killed, I couldn't imagine who could have done this. I had no ideas.
Detectives interview Paige to narrow down when the murder might have taken place.
Friday, at about 6:45, I decided to call my mother to see what time she wanted to go shopping on Saturday. And that's when she didn't answer the phone. It was extremely unusual for her not to answer the phone. So then I called the cell phone, and she didn't answer that either. Then I started to panic. So then I took off and went out south toward her house. And when I got to her house, the porch light was not on, and I knew something was very wrong. So I walked through to the kitchen, and it was dark. So I turned the light on, and there was her body laying at the bottom of the stairs. And I could feel the back of her head, and her head was ice cold. And I called 911. And then it just kind of hit me out of the blue that I was hearing weird noises. So I followed the noise upstairs to the hall bathroom. Both faucets in the tub were running full blast. And I thought, well, that's just really strange, because my mother didn't use that bathroom.
Detectives wonder if Nina's killer had turned on the faucets, and if so, why?
The victim's daughter had located the guest bathroom bathtub faucets running, and she had turned those faucets off. So the bathroom was processed for fingerprints and DNA.
In the victim's bedroom, there was like an imprint of where it looked like somebody had been laying on the comforter.
And near the bed, we could see buttons that appeared to be similar to the victim's blouse, as well as a hair roller that was similar to the hair rollers in the victim's hair. So that led us to believe that the victim was assaulted, and maybe her blouse may have been torn open at that location.
As every corner of the house is searched for evidence, investigators make a crucial discovery.
We opened up the knife drawer in the kitchen and located a paring knife where the blade was bent and there was blood at the base of the blade near the handle. That could mean that somebody had tried to wipe it clean.
Forensics bag the knife for further analysis and process the house with luminol, which can indicate the presence of blood.
The luminol tells us that somebody was moving around in that house with some amount of blood on them. We got that blue glow in the victim's bedroom, bathroom, hallway, living room, and the kitchen.
The front door was unlocked, and we didn't find any sign of forced entry, which was a big clue for us that our victim potentially knew who the suspect was.
There's no reason for anyone to hurt her. And my mother was not a very social person at all. She had no family other than me here in town that would be in and out of the house.
Paige points to one detail detectives could not have determined from their search.
There was a shelf by the front door where her cell phone always was, so she could take it when she went out the front door, and it was missing.
Had the killer snatched Nina's cell phone? Police request a trace on it, while officers go door to door looking for witnesses.
One of my other detectives found a party down the street that had seen a white male in the neighborhood earlier that day. He was in his 50s, walking with a limp. The witness saw him go to a black Jeep. He saw that car was parked kind of behind the house, about a block away. And so he sees this guy walking and kind of looking around. And so he just kind of mentally noted it. He kind of looked like he was probably up to no good.
Could the suspicious man be Nina Whitney's killer? As they start to track him down, detectives catch a break.
We found that Nina's phone was still on and still being used in South Kansas City. We were able to do surveillance and observe the person using our victim's cell phone.
Coming up, a break in the case reveals a potential serial killer.
We had another homicide.
There were zip ties that have been used for bindings.
He's terrorized an entire community.
And a grieving daughter takes matters into her own hands.
I did feel a need to help them investigate my mother's homicide.
If she didn't get the answers, then she kept asking.
In my gut, I just knew that was him.
Detectives investigating the vicious stabbing of 75-year-old Nina Whitney believe the killer stole her cell phone. Now, police have traced the phone to an address in South Kansas City and rush to apprehend the suspect.
We did kick his door in, and when we took the suspect into custody, we found that he had the phone on his person.
The suspect goes by the nickname Lil Mickey. Police demand to know how he came into possession of a murdered woman's cell phone.
He told us he was walking down the street pretty close to our victim's house and found that phone laying in the grass. He said he didn't make the most money in the world and was just glad to have a cell phone that was working and started using the cell phone.
Skeptical of his story, investigators ask him if he killed Nina Whitney.
Little Mickey adamantly denied being involved in any sort of violence with our victim or anything where someone was harmed or killed. We asked him, could you have bought this phone off somebody else? Did you get it from a person?
Despite hours of questioning, Lil Mickey stands by his story.
His story was, I found the phone there in the grass and picked it up.
Police want to know his whereabouts at the time of the murder.
Based on her lights being off in the house, we believe Nina's murder happened during daylight hours. And he did provide an alibi, a female that he had been with that day.
Investigators have no grounds to detain Lil Mickey any longer, but they obtain a sample of his DNA just in case.
He wouldn't seem like he would have a motive to commit this type of crime, but we still had to do our due diligence.
The next day, police tracked down the woman he used as his alibi.
So we talked to her. The information she was able to provide, it matched up with what he had been saying.
With Lil Mickey looking unlikely as the killer, detectives turned back to the theory that Nina knew her attacker.
It was obvious that she had let someone in the house because there was absolutely no forced entry.
We had to look at Nina's history and try to figure out who she would have let into the house. And we also had the witness that had seen a white male in the neighborhood. My supervisor thought the composite sketch would be a good thing to pursue in this case. The witness willingly came down to police headquarters and met with our sketch artist. She sat with him and gave a pretty good-looking composite sketch of what he believed the party looked like that he saw that day. We showed Paige that picture, and she looked at it for a long time, but didn't necessarily jog her memory about who it could possibly be.
The individual did not look familiar to me at all. I could not for the life of me think of anyone who fit that description.
Investigators can't be certain if the man seen by Nina's neighbor is the killer. But with few quality leads, police decide to release the sketch to the media.
I was the publisher and editor of the Cass County Democrat-Missourian. We all know that police sketches are an unexact science. However, I think they can be very useful. So we had run the sketch in the newspaper to put that sketch out to a larger audience.
As the sketch goes public, detectives work with Paige to come up with a list of people that Nina would have had a reason to let in to her home.
She'd had quite a bit of work done on the house in the last year or so there had been lots of people in and out working on the house.
Maybe someone that is a predator did work inside her house and decided that she would be a good victim. Paige went back into Nina's home and went through all of her records to show us dates and times when she had stuff done at her house.
The detectives got all that information from me and questioned everyone who had been in and out of that house.
My squad started working to collect DNA from anyone that we thought had contact with Nina, and I think we collected about 40 to 50 samples. Honestly, most people were willing to provide their DNA to us when we explained that this was an elderly woman that was brutally murdered. If there was someone that maybe we thought was fishy or involved or could potentially be the suspect, DNA is good to rule people out in cases like this.
The forensics lab will compare the scores of samples to the DNA recovered from Nina's body.
It'd be nice as a detective to get DNA results like they do on TV, 5 seconds later. but it was about a month after the homicide when we got our results back. My boss called me and she said that we had a DNA hit. So I thought that, well, if there's a DNA hit, then we'll be able to find a suspect. But that wasn't the case because it was unknown DNA.
The DNA does not match the dozens of samples collected by homicide investigators.
Everything from the mailman to Little Mickey to contractors that had been inside her house. It rules them out absolutely. But the DNA profile that was found was a match to another murder almost 2 years to the day in Harrisonville, Missouri. So we knew at that point that this was not the first time that this suspect did this. And that wasn't something I expected. It was a big deal. What concerned us was that we did have a serial killer type situation.
One month after the murder of Nina Whitney, DNA taken from the crime scene as matched to another homicide in the national database.
It was a match to another unsolved murder in Harrisonville, Missouri. It's a smaller town, about an hour south of Kansas City. Kara Jo Roberts was found inside her home in the bathtub, shot in the head with the bathtub running, just like Nina. It seemed like a sexually motivated homicide, and with the tub running, that matches Nina at our scene.
Police decide to keep this explosive new information under wraps.
At that point, we were trying to keep this information close to the chest because the suspect didn't know that we knew both crime scenes were connected. We did not want that in the public.
Detectives even withhold this new development from the victims' loved ones, including Paige.
I kept asking them, when is this going to be a cold case? And they kept telling me, well, not yet. We're not done yet. And I don't know what they were doing, but I know they were doing things behind the scenes.
Investigators head to Harrisonville to get briefed on the Kara Jo Roberts case.
Just reading through a case file doesn't give you the whole story. So to talk to an investigator that actually worked that case, it helps paint a better picture of what happened in the other investigation.
I was one of the detectives from Kansas City at the time that was sent to work on this case. Kara Jo and her husband lived right there in the small town. They had a kid. Seemed like a very happy relationship. Just your normal, happy family.
The Roberts family was devastated by a horrific tragedy on November 5th, 2008.
Her husband found Kara in the bathroom. She wasn't wearing any clothes. There were obvious gunshot injuries. She was in the bathtub, and the bathtub was running. There were zip ties that we speculated at the time had been used for bindings.
At the Kara Jo Roberts scene, we found 2 different white-colored zip ties that appear to have been used but cut. We also found a roll of duct tape. On both the zip ties and the duct tape, we had male DNA.
There was DNA found on Kara's body, and there was indications given by the medical examiner that she had been sexually assaulted.
Detectives investigating Nina's murder ask for a rundown of the suspects in Kara Jo's case.
Based on the fact of no forced entry, very much kind of angled towards us believing that the husband may have had something to do with this. A domestic violence type homicide is usually spur of the moment, rage and kind of action, but this could have been a situation where he was trying to control her physically with the bindings, and then it escalated.
Kara Jo's husband claimed he found his wife dead when he got home from work and immediately called 911.
From the time she was last seen to the time when her husband came home and found her was a very tight window. It was only like 45 minutes. Her husband gave what was kind of a complex alibi, but when we went to talk to his friends who were involved in that alibi, they were able to corroborate everything.
DNA testing at the time also cleared Kara Jo's husband, and no other viable suspects were identified. The investigation went cold until the DNA connection to Nina Whitney's murder revives the case 2 years later.
Nina's homicide was a lifeline to the Kara Jo Roberts case. We have double information, and we have a bigger picture of what's going on in both of these acts.
What we have to do at that point is start doing what's called victimology. You basically have to understand the circle of Kara Jo's world. and you look at the circle of Nina's world, you know these two cases are linked, and you want to find those commonalities in between.
What was really interesting was all the stuff in the Kara Jo Roberts case that matched up to Nina's case. As far as the tub running, we had a lot of different theories, but our main one was if our suspect was going to commit a rape, they would want to use that tub to wash away evidence after the act. In Nina's case, he turns on the water to try to maybe get her body up into the bathtub. He may have not been able to drag her body up those stairs. Our witness down the street sees this guy walking with a limp, and we thought the limp may have hindered him from getting her body back up to the tub. So just like our case, the Kara Jo Roberts case had someone down the street that saw someone in the neighborhood.
The witness had seen a Jeep, had seen a male going to the Jeep, and that male may have been limping.
And it looked like they were up to no good.
Despite the telling parallels, police can't find anyone connected to both Nina and Kara Jo.
That was not the answer that we wanted as detectives, because that meant that it was somebody totally random. A random person coming in and taking their life. That's like every person's nightmare.
In a case like this, where you know there's a suspect out there that could do this again, it makes it even more urgent to try to catch the person. So you're grasping at straws, looking for any leads, any information, any help you can get to try to solve a case like this.
You can only work with what information you've got coming in. There wasn't any new information coming in at that point.
Running out of options, detectives turn to the one person who might be able to connect the two victims.
Detective Blank called me, and he said, "Paige, I have something to tell you." And what he told me was more horrifying than my mother's homicide. That scared the hell out of me.
Detectives investigating the stabbing death of Nina Whitney have informed her daughter Paige about a stunning development.
Detective Blank told me that there was a DNA match from the saliva they found on my mother's shirt to DNA that they found on Kara Roberts in Harrisonville. Kara had been raped, put in the bathtub, and then shot in the back of the head. The thought that we had a serial killer here in town is enough to cause panic for every female in this city.
We provided information from both crime scenes to Paige. And that's not something we would normally tell our victim's daughter. But in this case, Paige was a probation and parole officer. She is savvy in law enforcement, so we thought we could trust her with that information. We wanted to see if anything in her memory would be jogged to try to figure out if there's any common people, common locations that both victims would have known or gone to.
At the time, I thought it had to be someone who targeted my mother specifically. But when they showed me the evidence in Kara's case, there's just a million things to think about when you're trying to come up with a profile for someone like that.
There wasn't much there that seemed to be connected between the two victims. There wasn't an aha moment in that meeting at all.
It's been 5 months since the murder of Nina Whitney, and investigators are desperate for a break. They turn back to the composite sketch of the man with the limp seen close to Nina's house.
I wasn't necessarily a believer in the composite sketch thing. People make their own determination on whether they think the information they have is valuable to a case. They see that sketch and they decide, well, this guy's got glasses and the guy I know doesn't have glasses. And so the danger in that is that that person may have information, but that person may be turned off by the sketch.
We had run the sketch in the newspaper, but really that sketch hadn't brought in a lot of leads.
Despite their reservations, police hope that more people will see the sketch on billboards around the city, and someone will identify the suspect.
They were able to put that picture along 71 Highway, along with our tips hotline. The number of tips that we received on this case based on that sketch were not as numerous as you would think. All of them have to be followed up on, because there could be something there that you're going to miss if you don't take those tips seriously.
Weeks pass as investigators chase down leads that go nowhere. lack of progress takes a heavy toll on Nina's family.
I was really angry that she died in her own home in that terror and that panic, helpless and alone and fighting for her life.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I think about my mother's last few minutes of life. I know the neighbor was home next door and nobody heard my mother screaming. I wake up to the sound of her screaming 2, 3 o'clock every morning. It doesn't go away. It does not go away.
There's nothing worse than having to tell a family member, I'm sorry, there's no new information coming in, because they're frustrated. They're of the mindset that, why aren't you out there doing something?
At her wit's end, Paige summons the strength she learned from Nina growing up and takes it upon herself to search for the killer.
The investigation was not moving fast enough to make me happy, so I did feel a need to help them investigate my mother's homicide. I drove around the city and went to every antique shop, every flea market, every thrift store I could think of where she liked to shop.
She was looking for that white male walking with a limp and that black Jeep. And Paige was seeing black Jeeps like that everywhere.
I would take pictures of all the cars that looked like black Jeeps and all the license plates on those vehicles and forwarded all of those to the detectives.
Paige made it her job to be involved, and if she didn't get the answers, then she kept asking.
I can't even explain to you how badly I needed to know who murdered my mother.
Despite Paige's efforts, 6 months after her mother's death, the investigation starts to go cold.
Those kind of unsolved cases in Kansas City leave an entire metro area on edge. As the days turn into weeks and weeks turn into months, how do you keep that case alive within the pages of your newspaper? Most of our weekly papers did not include an update because there was nothing to update in the case.
I kept thinking, this is going to be a cold case. I'm never going to figure it out. I'm never going to figure it out.
You always hope for them to get information to catch a suspect quickly, but I just couldn't fathom who would have done it. I had no suspects in mind.
I drove around and took pictures of the billboards because I wanted to make sure I got pictures of them before they had taken them down. But the sketch concerned me because I don't know if that description was accurate. I thought there's just so many questions that I will never have answers to.
Suddenly, 1 month later, Paige has a realization.
May 26, 2011, I was driving down 71 Highway in rush hour traffic, and I just happened to glance up and look at the lower half of the billboard, and I swear to you, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Like lightning had come out of the sky and hit me in the head. It literally all fell into place as I'm driving down the highway.
Seven months after the murder of Nina Whitney, her daughter Paige has just been struck by a mind-blowing realization.
I was driving down 71 Highway, and I just happened to glance up at the billboard. Prior to that, when they showed me the sketch, the individual did not look familiar to me at all. I just focused on the lower half of his face and the chin, and it's just an epiphany. It was Jeff. Jeff Moreland was a boyfriend that I had for 3 years while we were in college. We met in 1983 at Central Missouri State University, had a relationship for 3 years. Jeff and I met in a criminal justice class. He was as sweet and charming and funny as he could possibly be, and I truly fell head over heels in love with him. Once I got my graduate degree, I became a social worker, and Jeff went on to become a police officer. He loved being a police officer. That was his ideal dream job.
Paige and Jeff broke up after 3 years of dating, much to her mother's dismay.
My mother absolutely adored him. For years after we dated, my mother told me she wished I had married him. I know if he showed up on the doorstep, she would happily have let him in the house.
Could Paige's ex-boyfriend from 2 decades prior really be the sadistic serial killer detectives have been hunting for?
I was so lost in my own head, trying to tell myself that Jeff didn't do it. I kept trying to tell myself that I was wrong, but in my gut, I just knew that was him. At the parole office, I'd mentioned it to a couple of the girls that I work with, and they told me that I should run him through the system. So, well, that makes sense. So I ran Jeff through the system. And lo and behold, if he didn't have a black Jeep Wrangler registered in his name, and I nearly lost my cookies. And I also found out Jeff had been a police officer in the Grandview Police Department, but Jeff had retired about 5 years prior to my mother's homicide because he'd had Parkinson's.
Does the Parkinson's diagnosis mean Paige's ex could be the man with a limp spotted near Nina's home? Paige brings her findings to detectives.
I told him that Jeff had been a police officer in Grandview and gave him all the information that I had.
Officers look up Jeff Moreland's home address and discover he lives in the same small town as the first murder victim, Kara Jo Roberts.
He lived in Harrisonville, Missouri. So that was the first person during our investigation that matched all of those factors.
Detective Blank said, yep, it could be him.
Detectives know they have to take extra care when investigating an ex-cop.
Harrisonville is a very small community, and Detective Blank told me that Jeff knew every law enforcement officer in the county, and that he would find out that he was under investigation.
Investigators decide a direct approach is the best option.
We did not believe that we had probable cause at that point to get a search warrant to get his DNA. So we went down and knocked on his front door. I did tell him, your name's come up in a homicide, and we need to get a DNA sample from you. If someone were to tell me that, I'd be like, what homicide are you talking about? That was not Mr. Moreland's reaction. He said, well, I've got to go take my cat to the vet, and he went back inside his house. My gut was telling me that we had our guy, but you need to be sure that this is your guy before you go with your gut.
Police again asked Jeff to provide a voluntary DNA sample.
I ended up calling him and telling him again that, hey, we need your DNA to compare to this homicide, and then we'll be done.
Jeff again claims that he's too busy to provide a sample. A week later, investigators receive an unexpected phone call from the police department Jeff retired from, located just outside Kansas City.
So the sergeant with Grandview Police Department calls us and says that he's been in contact with Jeff Moreland and he provided him a DNA sample. We rushed down there and we made contact with the sergeant. On his desk, he had a pill bottle.
The sergeant provides a strange account of how he obtained Jeff's DNA.
Jeff told him that, I want you to meet me at this gas station along 71 Highway. And Jeff shows up in his black Jeep. And Jeff tells him that Kansas City has come and accused him of being involved in a murder. As he's explaining the story, he takes swabs and puts them in his mouth, and then Jeff hands him this bottle along with my card and says, here, give this to the detectives. We tell the sergeant, that sample's not going to work. You can't just provide your own sample. And the sergeant sort of indicated, well, we'll just get rid of it in the trash then. We told him, no, we'll take that bottle off his hands and take that from him.
The evidentiary value of this stuff is just worthless. But obviously, we recover it and we examine it.
That DNA was tested, and it did not match our homicide.
The fact that that DNA came back as not a match just didn't surprise me at all. Had he followed protocol, that would have exonerated him. And he very easily could have done that, but he chose not to.
We more and more really thought that we might have had our suspect based on his actions at that point. We all know about serial killers. I was worried that the suspect was going to do this act again.
A few days later, detectives get the call they've been dreading.
I received a phone call. There was a rape that occurred in Harrisonville. But the victim was able to get away, and then she was able to contact police. The victim took the officers to where this event occurred the day before. It was Jeff Moreland's residence. So my first question is, where's Moreland at now?
When police go to arrest Jeff, he's nowhere to be found.
Detective Blank told me Jeff may have raped a third victim, and he is now on the run. I didn't know if he would be after me. I didn't know if maybe he had figured out that it was me who initially contacted the police. That was a nightmare.
Former police officer Jeff Moreland is the prime suspect in the murders of Kara Jo Roberts and Nina Whitney. Tragically, a third woman has now been attacked, but Jeff has disappeared, and investigators fear he may strike again.
When I heard that he had taken off, I was worried about Paige.
The detectives told me they truly did not know where he had gone or what he knew. I told Detective Blank he would probably find Jeff in Iowa near his family.
As Paige predicted, a trace on Jeff's cell phone leads police to a motel in Iowa.
He had taken a bunch of over-the-counter sleeping pills. He tried to take his own life and then ended up in a hospital in Des Moines.
Jeff survives the suicide attempt, and he is taken into custody by local police.
We headed up there to Iowa to get Mr. Moreland's DNA. We drove all the way back from Iowa with it. We wanted to be sure he wasn't going to get out of custody or bond out or whatever. And then the next morning, we got the DNA results back. We told Paige that his DNA matched both crime scenes. Jeff is, in fact, involved in the murders of Kara Jo and Nina.
It just blows my mind. And it was beyond all comprehension to me. This was 2010 when he murdered my mother. And Jeff and I split up in 1987. I had no idea what Jeff would become. The last time I actually saw Jeff was in 1994. He told me then that he periodically would patrol up and down my mother's street just to make sure that everything was okay. And at the time I thought, oh, that's so sweet. But now looking back on it, I just don't know.
Jeff Moreland is charged with the murders of Kara Jo Roberts and Nina Whitney and the sexual assault of the third victim. Soon after laying charges, investigators learn about the source of Jeff's phony DNA.
We were contacted by Jeff Moreland's ex-wife, and Jeff Moreland had a daughter with this ex-wife, and that daughter was engaged to someone. And that guy said that Jeff had called him out of the blue, and Jeff told him that he needed a sample of his DNA for a paternity test because someone was accusing Jeff of being the father of a kid. And so he provided a DNA sample and gave it to Jeff Moreland.
Then, Jeff tricked the Grandview police sergeant with some sleight of hand.
So the sergeant provided us a formal statement where he said he wasn't able to see Moreland's hands at all times when Moreland was taking a sample of his DNA.
Jeff's attempted deception backfires, only giving prosecutors more evidence against him.
There's nothing for the defense to attack. There's nothing to be argued because the physical evidence was just overwhelming.
I think it also says a lot that Jeffrey Moreland had zero witnesses in his defense at the trial.
He got life without parole plus 50 years consecutive on Kara Roberts' homicide. And then he got 10 years for armed criminal action and 20 years for murder second on my mother's case to run concurrent.
With no trial testimony from Jeff, police and the victims' families are left to piece together exactly what happened to Nina Whitney and Kara Jo Roberts.
What we do know is that Jeff Moreland took Kara Jo's life. My personal opinion is he was driving by and saw her in the yard, and he was in that mode where he was hunting and decided that's his target.
After killing Kara Jo, it seems Jeff developed a taste for murder. He struck again 2 years later.
I believe the day that Nina was murdered, Jeff Moreland simply knocked on the door and Nina saw who it was and let him in the house. It's not necessarily uncommon for a predator to go after older women because they feel like they are easier victims.
Of course, my mother would let him in. And then at some point, he had to have started forcing her backwards up the stairs. I think when he got her into her bedroom, that he tried to rip her shirt off of her, forced her onto the bed, but she did fight back. She did run. My mother went running down the stairs. He chased her. He stabbed her 24 times. The kill shot was here through the throat.
At some point, he turns on the water to try to maybe get her body up into the bathtub to wash off his DNA.
But at that point, he knew with his Parkinson's acting up that there was no way he was going to be able to take her body back up 2 flights of stairs and put her in a bathtub. And then he went upstairs to clean the knife off, put the knife in the kitchen drawer, and went out through the sliding glass door.
Investigators believe that before he left, Moreland stole Nina's cell phone to throw police off his trail.
He has the presence of mind to grab that phone and throw that phone in the grass a quarter mile away from Nina's house. He knows that the investigator is going to be caught up in that phone as sort of a way to lead us away from him.
I did not know for 8 months who murdered my mother. The 8 months that I spent not knowing made me insane.
When you have families that do their investigations, sometimes it's not the best. But Paige being involved was actually good in this case because she was actually the person that found Jeff Moreland.
I can't even explain to you how grateful I am. Between my mother's neighbor and the sketch artist, I would have never figured it out. Never would have figured it out if it hadn't been for the two of them.
To call this an unexpected killer is almost an understatement. Jeff Moreland terrorized an entire community.
Police speculate that Jeff's forced retirement a few years before the murders may have been the catalyst that set him on the path to kill.
I feel that when he developed Parkinson's and he had his power taken away from him as a police officer, the murders were almost like him getting revenge on the world.
I joined this organization called Parents of Murdered Children and Other Survivors of Homicide Victims. And we're all basically going through the same thing. So it does help to have someone who understands the enormity of what has happened.
I think Nina would want to be remembered as a strong, independent woman who fought to the end. And that's how I'll always remember her.
There are frogs in the stores everywhere. You can't go anywhere without seeing cute little frogs somewhere. I think about my mother all the time when I see things that I know that she would appreciate, or when I hear country music. I think about her a lot.
A vibrant, outgoing woman starting the next chapter in her life.
She's just retired, and she was very much focused on the future. Diane was a person that everyone should meet in life. Positive, happy.
But her life is cut short in a night of immeasurable horror.
There was blood splatter everywhere.
I never saw so much trauma to one person's body.
It chills me to the bone.
Police have a complex scene and a long list of suspects.
There was over 100 male contacts in Diane's phone.
There was always drama with boyfriends.
He refused to give DNA. There was something out there that he was hiding. Every direction we followed, we ended up running into dead ends.
Just when police think they might never catch the killer.
Who could it be? Why is this so complicated?
The case takes a mind-blowing turn.
And I was like, what? Oh my God.
No one expected this case to break on something like this.
Union Township, New Jersey. A bustling East Coast community with a small town feel.
Union Township's a mix of mostly suburban, but it's got its downtown area. It's peaceful, it's quaint, it's safe.
But all that changes on a cold November afternoon.
911, where is the emergency? I can't even think of the address right now. Okay, ma'am, listen to me. Take a deep breath. What's going on there?
She's not answering.
Can you tell me if she's breathing or not?
No, she's not. Harry, please. Please, Harry.
After receiving a call from the victim's parents, the Union Police responded immediately to the home. The father was across the streets with the mom, and they were clearly in shock.
The couple tells police they found their daughter, Diane Zaleski, unresponsive inside.
When I got there, there was massive amounts of blood in the foyer. The walls were covered with blood spray. There was just blood everywhere.
We followed the blood trail into the basement and discovered the victim's body.
She had clearly been dragged to the basement.
You could see her at the bottom of the stairs. She was literally in a pool of blood. There were stab wounds all over her torso, her face, her neck.
There were defensive wounds on her arms and hands. We knew there was a struggle. No doubt. I never saw so much trauma to one person's body.
She was partially clothed. There was a pair of black underwear, literally right next to her head.
Had the victim been sexually assaulted as well? Investigators find more disturbing clues.
There were 2 empty containers of solvent by the woman.
It appeared that the body had been cleaned.
So this was an effort to obscure evidence.
The killer also tried to erase their tracks throughout the house.
The kitchen sink was full of soapy water, and inside was the remote controls, some cleaning brushes, and lots of various items that it appeared the suspect had touched.
Also, the garbage can was gone, which led us to believe that the killer got rid of DNA or blood evidence or fingerprints. The entire bathroom area was soaking wet. The shower head was not in its cradle. We thought the killer took a shower, so we pulled the drain to check for DNA.
The crime scene was, how I would describe it, Herculean.
Detectives can't find a murder weapon, but forensics discover what could be a crucial piece of evidence the killer failed to clean up.
There was a droplet of blood on the floor.
It appeared to be foreign to us. It was cast off and inconsistent with the victim's blood.
He had cut himself somehow in the course of the struggle, whether it be from a knife, from punching her.
We knew that the guy was trying to cover himself, but it was minute, and they found it. They saw that blood.
We immediately swabbed that piece of evidence and transported it to our DNA lab.
Detectives get more information from Diane's parents.
They had gone to the house because she was supposed to take a sister-in-law to a doctor's appointment that morning, and nobody could get in touch with her.
They entered her home, and they discovered Diane's body.
Her parents were really suffering.
Diane was a born and bred Jersey girl, gregarious and adored by her friends.
Diane, she brought joy to a lot of people's lives. Very positive, happy, laughing, and dancing. Even though she wasn't married and she didn't have children, she was very much focused on her family. Her parents were a little bit older, so she was kind of watching over them. And I knew her brother because he had lived with her for a while.
After 17 years of working as a legal secretary, Diane was now taking time for herself.
Here's this young single woman in her own house, and she's just retired. When she was offered a certain buyout package, there was no hesitation. She was ready. She had worked long and hard in her life. Diane was social. She had her friends from work, and often they'd go to happy hours. Then she had her dance friends. She would go on dates. She would just say, you know, Joanne, in the end, I'm just looking for a guy who can carry in my packages. She still had hope that she was going to meet somebody to spend life with.
As investigators finish processing the crime scene, a theory evolves.
There were no forced entry marks that we could find in the house. He took the time trying to obscure everything. He tried to clean her body. All this took time.
In addition, there was a pot that appeared to have food in it. Maybe Diane had been cooking or had been eating when her killer entered her home, and there was a fork from that pot that we found in the kitchen sink full of cleaning fluid, which led us to believe the suspect had also taken time to eat.
I was involved with at least 150 homicides. I never saw anyone hang out in a house after a murder. I just never heard of it.
We felt it was someone Diane knew.
The killer was very comfortable in this house after the death of the victim.
Which led us down the boyfriend road, or someone who was dating her road.
But what was the killer's motive?
For any human being to do this to another human being is, I don't even have a word for it.
Police rule out robbery since nothing appears to be stolen, including Diane's wallet. And when investigators look through it, they find a clue.
We found a business card.
It belongs to someone named Mark. Who is this man? And could he know anything about Diane's brutal murder?
We found out from her family that he lived in the general area, and it was a bar just up the street from where Diane lived. And we found out that they had been there. So we think that's where she actually got his business card. And because she was out there, she was dating, we wanted to speak to everybody. Maybe he had some information. He came in, and I showed him a picture of her, and he flat out refused to say that he even knew her. He said he had no idea why the card was in her wallet. And then he said, she's not the target I would usually go for. Target?
Coming up, old boyfriends with disturbing pasts.
There was a restraining order in effect.
Play cat and mouse with police.
That wasn't his real name. This guy was ducking us.
When an unexpected tip sparks a race to find the killer.
Oh, he was just a monster.
There was now an absolute manhunt.
Police investigating the gruesome murder of Diane Zaleski found a single business card in the victim's wallet. It belongs to a man named Mark. Investigators want to know if he and Diane recently met, and when detectives question him, they become suspicious.
The words that came out of his mouth about targets were very strange. His mannerisms and just the things he said, they were wrong. I don't call girls that I'm going to go out with targets. He had done something, maybe, to other women. He wouldn't tell us anything.
Detectives found a drop of blood at the crime scene that they believe belongs to Diane's killer. Could it be linked to Mark?
He refused to give DNA. Just out and out refused.
It was something that was concerning to us. Someone who's innocent usually is cooperative.
He had taken a bottle of water from us, and when he was finished, he wouldn't throw it out. He left. And he carried his bottle of water with him. So he obviously knew something about DNA. So I followed him. He walked about 2 blocks away from the building, and he threw it.
Detectives collect the bottle and send it in for testing. As news of the murder spreads.
I couldn't believe it. I just was like, oh my God. Oh my God. It was like a bad dream. I just couldn't believe that it was her. It was just so devastating.
Police fan across Diane's neighborhood, hoping someone saw something.
One older neighbor told us that earlier she had seen 2 children playing outside. And she knew one of the children lived in the neighborhood. She didn't know who the other child was. During the winter, she had seen him shoveling Diane's driveway.
Had the neighborhood kids witnessed anything out of the ordinary?
And so detectives wanted to identify those children. And when we spoke with the neighbor across the street from Diane, kind of diagonally, she said she had a daughter and a grandson. So those were the children identified as being outside.
All she could say is, I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. Her 11-year-old grandson didn't indicate anything else, and boom, the door gets closed and we're done with our canvas there.
But detectives do get information that raises some troubling new questions.
The neighbors told us that her garbage can was outside in the street, which led us to believe that the killer got rid of the garbage. How would he know that if he put the garbage out, it would be gone in the morning?
And why was the killer so desperate to get rid of it?
Was there evidence or fingerprints? We didn't know.
We contacted the local garbage company, and we unfortunately discovered that it was already in the incinerator.
When detectives reviewed Diane's autopsy report, they learned she was killed sometime between 10 p.m. and 1 the next morning.
The medical examiner determined the cause and manner of death to be homicide and multiple blunt force injuries. The wounds were too numerous to count.
The person that had done this was obviously very violent. Some person who had snapped.
Because the body had been cleaned, the medical examiner could not determine if there was any signs of sexual assault.
What she had to live through, it's gruesome. It's frightening. I struggle with why. Why did that happen to her? I don't understand that it was just a heinous crime.
A week after Diane's death, investigators get the results from the blood they suspect came from the killer at the scene.
We were able to obtain a DNA profile, and it was male.
We did enter the profile through the DNA databank, and that came up negative.
So we knew we had the killer, we just didn't know who it was.
Will Mark be a match? Police have to wait another week to find out.
And he was negative.
Because DNA is the only piece of evidence police have to tie the killer to the scene, detectives need to find the match.
It was our goal to locate and interview every male individual that she was friends or romantically involved with and obtain a DNA sample. We discovered that there was over 100 male contacts in Diane's phone.
One of the first contacts detectives talked to is someone named Mike Prunell.
We showed him a picture of Diane. He was like, Mark, he denied ever knowing her. And okay, take people at their word.
Without anything linking Mike to Diane, detectives don't see any reason to question him further and let him go.
We are interviewing basically anybody and everybody, and we were coming up with nothing. We interviewed girlfriends just to get a feel of Diane, how she was, if she had mentioned guys she might have been dating.
I met the prosecutor, and he wanted to know everything about Diane and what I knew about her. There was always drama with boyfriends. We thought for sure that it was one of those bad boyfriends.
A familiar name comes up, Mike Prunell. But he had told police he didn't know Diane, so detectives do more digging.
You know, checking driver's license histories and criminal histories, and you don't find Mike. We thought it was curious. We wanted to speak to him again, but he never returned a phone call. Every direction we followed, we ended up running into dead ends.
Why can't police find any records for Mike? And why did he lie about knowing Diane?
There was something out there that he was hiding.
When detectives ask Diane's brother Ron about Mike, what they hear completely surprises them.
Not only did he know her, but he asked Diane's father for her hand in marriage some 20 years prior. So he knew her real well. Another red flag.
Detectives investigating the murder of Diane Zaleski uncover shocking information about a prior person of interest. A man they interviewed, Mike Prunell, was adamant he didn't know the victim. But Diane's brother Ron tells police that's a lie.
We had found out Mike asked for her hand in marriage. He said Mike had an extensive history with her. He'd known her for at least 20 years. Prior to her move into the new house, she was renting an apartment from him for over a year. But he denied ever knowing her when I showed a picture of her to him.
Police discover more secrets and lies about Mike Prunell.
We found out that wasn't his real name. And when we did find out what it was, we ran his criminal history and we found out that he had domestic violence. And his wife at the time stated that he was beating her severely. He sat on her chest and was just pummeling her face to the point where her eye orbital was broken. So that sent flags off. We were totally convinced this was the guy, because he did beat his former wife. There was a restraining order in effect. And Diane was beaten so badly, this guy was pretty much ducking us. He wouldn't answer phone calls. It took us a little while to find him, but we did. Eventually, got him in again a second time.
But again, Mike won't admit he knows Diane.
He was being less than truthful. It's like, okay, you deny knowing her, you asked her to marry you. It's very suspicious.
He was lying, obviously. We never discovered the reason for that.
Getting nowhere, police take another approach.
We asked where he was, the time of the murder, and he couldn't give us an alibi. And we spoke to him in depth. He didn't give us any answers, nothing concrete.
Detectives can't hold him, but they don't want to let him go before getting one thing.
Eventually, he did consent to DNA. Our hopes are all raised.
We immediately transported it to our lab. We would get the result within 48 hours.
While they wait, Mike is released for the second time, and detectives work to place their suspect at the scene.
We found out that his brother ran a business close to Diane's house. Hopefully there was video evidence there for people that were coming and going. Somebody who worked there might have seen him. We interviewed everybody, but it didn't really drum up anything tangible. And there was absolutely no video surveillance at all. Nothing.
Detectives' next hope lies with the DNA results.
And it was negative. It wasn't a match.
We were feeling frustrated because we knew the killer was still out there. We had his profile. To say this wasn't a mountainous investigation is an understatement. We had to track down and obtain biological samples from close to 100 individuals.
We took swabs from her family members so that we could exclude them. At some point, as being the source of the DNA.
While searching through Diane's computer, forensic analysts discover new information.
We took her computer. There were several different things that we found.
Everything is time-stamped. Hours after Diane's death, there was activity on the PC.
Numerous items, technology items, were attempted to be purchased using Diane's credit card. It was someone that was comfortable having things delivered to Diane's house and it not being out of the ordinary if they were the ones collecting them.
We knew he tried to purchase an Apple computer, an iPhone, and it didn't go through. We had no idea why the purchase itself didn't go through.
We also found that the killer, while in the home, was also searching pornographic websites.
I mean, to go on pornographic websites after you just brutally killed a woman.
Waiting for justice, takes a toll on Diane's friends.
Who could it be? Why is this so complicated? We watch the news all the time and we see these things, we see murders, but when it happens to somebody you know, it's devastating. It's sad. It made me very sad about humanity. That someone is so capable of doing something so brutal to someone that is so beautiful. Everyone that loved her wanted closure on this.
3 weeks after Diane's murder, detectives get results back from the crime lab that send the investigation in an unexpected direction.
We tested the black underwear found next to the decedent's head. DNA profile was collected. That DNA came back to her brother.
After 54-year-old Diane Zaleski is savagely murdered, detectives discovered DNA from the crime scene belongs to someone close to home.
The DNA that was in the pair of underwear lying next to Diane came back to Ron, her brother. A lot of things ran through all of our minds.
We just couldn't believe it.
We thought that there might have been something sexual with her brother, and she had enough. And he killed her. Brutally killed his sister. Diane's brother worked for the Department of Public Works. So he would know when garbage was collected on her street.
The killer knew I can stay until the garbage is removed and then I'm safe to leave.
So there's a possibility that Diane's brother could have done it, collected all the evidence, and taken out the garbage. The killer was there for a long time. Diane's brother, he knew her pattern, her daily pattern. He would be comfortable staying on the scene, making themselves something to eat. I called him up that night and said, "Hey, do you got 10 minutes to come down and talk to me?"
Ron agrees to come in the next day.
How do you say this without accusing the brother of basically having sex with his sister? Because that's what it leads you to believe. I have this report saying that Ron's semen was found in the underwear, so I just put the report on the desk and I slid it over to him and I said, "What do you think?" It's like he was hit by a freight train. The jaw drops. He said, I can't explain it. It can't be true. He went on about the wash and the laundry, that up until just prior to her death, she was doing laundry at her brother's house. I sort of left it at that. I said, we can keep this between us for now. I'll talk to you again in a couple days.
In the interim, detectives send Ron's DNA to compare with the blood spot found at the scene. They also get some crucial details from Ron's wife.
The wife said he was home with me, he couldn't have done this, he didn't do this. We asked specific pointed questions. She told us they weren't Diane's underwear, they were Ron's wife's underwear. They had the same size and brand of underwear. She did tell us that Diane had been doing laundry in their house. We also found out sperm can be resilient into the wash. So the sperm that was in the underwear could actually be from Diane's brother, and her sister-in-law and her underwear got mixed up. The whole family got by his side. After conducting all the interviews, we all came to the conclusion that he didn't do a thing.
There's hard proof of Ron's innocence when investigators find out his DNA isn't a match for the blood found at the scene.
The case took lots of twists and turns, and there were parts that were shocking to us where we had to kind of sit down and regroup. Diane was also on some dating websites, so we also had to attack that aspect of the case.
Could she have met someone sinister over the internet?
Online dating can be frightening. There are people who are really troubled, and if they come across your path, you are the victim.
Detectives focus on someone who called and texted Diane a lot.
Kyle came to our attention because he was in her phone. And Kyle was very evasive. Didn't want to come in for an interview. He was just a friend. He wasn't romantic with her at all. At least that's what he said.
But was that true? Or did Kyle want more than Diane's friendship?
Her circle of friends said he was a possible person of interest. And we acted on it. We followed up on it. He was not cooperative. We obtained subpoenas to go find him and bring him in for statements.
When he finally did come in for an interview and refused to give a DNA sample, I think it was too intrusive to him. And he asked a lot of questions. Normally, I'm the guy asking all the questions. So it gets your radar up a little bit that something's not exactly right with this guy. He actually said that he was at the house the week prior to her death, so he was familiar with the house, wanted a relationship with the victim. He denied that. We didn't believe that was true at all. People that I'd spoken to didn't think that he was her type. Maybe she laughed at him and told him to get out. Why else would he be evasive if he wasn't hiding something?
There were no signs of forced entry at all to the home, so Diane must have let this person into her home.
Was that person Kyle?
Maybe he didn't go there with the intent to kill, but maybe something flipped the switch.
Detectives want to know where Kyle was the night of the murder.
He said he works nights, and all the access in the building was key card controlled.
Detectives check logs. There is a record of Kyle swiping in.
But who's to say that somebody else wasn't using his key card? Until we got DNA, we'll just never know.
Investigators tell Kyle if he wants to be ruled out, he needs to cooperate.
We did eventually collect his DNA. He was negative. DNA set him free.
As weeks turn into months, investigators are far from uncovering the identity of Diane's killer.
We're hitting the year anniversary of Diane's death. It was very hard to explain to the family that we were no closer. You saw a family not being able to fully grieve because they didn't know who did this.
It was like a bad dream. I was worried. I said that they should have found someone by this time.
We knew the killer was out there. We were feeling frustrated. He would never be identified. That was our worst fear.
It's been a year since Diane Zaleski was found stabbed to death in her home, and police are no closer to solving her murder. To find her killer, detectives come up with a new strategy.
You usually try to piece together the victim's life, but we felt we needed to come at this from another angle and try to figure out who our suspect was.
Detective Henderson met with the FBI profile unit to identify what type of behavior a person may have done this to Diane.
We talked to psychologists, psychiatrists, and we hashed everything out. Where we went, why we went there, what did this lead, is there anything still open? We went through all the DNA, we went through all the interviews, we went through the whole case. You know, the person trying to buy stuff online, the pornography that was visited, everything. We laid out the whole case.
The profile came back to a loner, a petty thief, possibly, someone with psychological issues, someone that was in her life, but not for a long time.
Age would have been younger. It would have been somebody that was into technology.
We realized that The individuals that we were speaking to did not fit that profile.
To catch the killer, investigators generate new leads.
One of the things was on the year anniversary, do a media blitz. Local TV, local newspapers.
We just wanted to see whether or not it might stir the pot.
Detectives decide to release new information to the public.
So the things that we included in the press release, whoever killed Diane cleaned up after himself. We also said that we now have the killer's DNA on file. And then we recanvassed everywhere.
After a month, detectives have received a flurry of new tips. And one really grabs their attention.
Detective Rob Henderson received a phone call from an individual out of state indicating that she was on social media with an individual who was concerned about his well-being and his safety because he thought he was being investigated by police because of a serious crime he committed in New Jersey.
She tells me, I'm a stay-at-home mom. You may think I'm a little crazy, but I'm Facebook friends with this guy.
This woman was on Facebook and had met a person years earlier in a Facebook chat room and then eventually formed a friendship with this person. She explained to us that she had had conversations with him that were troubling to her.
She had said that he had told her that he had committed a murder.
This witness was very concerned for her family, but she said, if he had anything to do with this, I need to speak the truth.
We had been friends for about 3 or 4 years at that time. We used to chat through Instant Messenger all the time. He had a lot of different screen names. He called me his big little sister. He was 9 years younger than me. He told me he lived in New Jersey. He was fluctuating in and out of homelessness. He told me that he sold drugs and things like that, but I didn't feel like that was who he was. I think he was just doing it because he felt like he had to. Out of the blue, he's like, I did the worst thing you can think of. And I'm kind of sitting there thinking, like, what is he talking about? I don't know, a drug dealer getting killed. And I was like, what did you do? He said, they found DNA. And so I'm like, what do you mean they found DNA? While I was talking to him, I Googled some articles just to see if anything matched up with the story that he told me. And so I went online and I looked up murder, New Jersey DNA. And instantly an article came up.
She searched and she found the 1-year anniversary article. We put together to try to rekindle some interest in Diane's story.
I was shocked of what I did find. The article says that he tried to purchase an iPad with using her credit cards. The information that they put in the article matched what I knew about my friend. And a light bulb just went off in my head. I know that's him. It had to have been him.
She told us that he had been washing clothing at the home and that how he had literally been in his boxers cleaning.
She told me that he told her that he made himself dinner. Now, we did release certain things in the article about there was some food, but we didn't say he made himself a meal. We didn't provide that information, but he did.
We ended that phone call, and then within a matter of hours, we're booking a flight to visit her and to take some evidence from her. Upon meeting with her and looking at her computer and doing a forensic examination, we knew we had the right guy.
Detectives asked the woman for his name.
Nashon. That's what he called himself, because he didn't like his first name, Darnell.
She was a little nervous and a little hesitant, but eventually. She gave us his full name.
Arnell Yearwood.
The last name gets detectives' attention.
We knew from our canvas that individuals with that same last name lived diagonally across the street from Diane.
When we look back at all the documented reports, it was determined that we had spoke to the killer's mother.
After over a year and a half investigating the grisly murder of Diane Zaleski, police finally get the break they need. They have the name of the suspected killer, Arnell Yearwood. And in a shocking twist, detectives discover his family actually lives on Diane's street, and they've been to the house.
We were there last year after one older neighbor told us that she had seen two kids playing outside. And she knew one of the children lived in the neighborhood. She didn't know who the other child was.
We did some more digging and some more investigation on Yearwood. Arnell Yearwood, although he was in his 20s, he was very small in stature. So he could be mistaken in a puffy jacket for a kid. We knew that Diane had some kids on the block helping shovel snow or do some yard work. It really led us to believe who was described as this kid was the killer. We went back across the street, made it look like we were canvassing other homes, but really we only had one home that we wanted information from, and that was his mother, Mrs. Yearwood. So we went to her home, said, "We know you have a son," and asked specific information about that son. And her daughter, who lived in the home, the mother of that child that was seen on the block, expressed to us that her brother, Arnell, had been at times living in the basement. And it would have been during the time frame of Diane's murder. That her brother sometimes would be outside with her own son.
Arnell's mother insists she has no idea where her 26-year-old son is.
We have to find this guy because we have to do a DNA match.
There was now an absolute manhunt.
A track and trace on Arnell's phone narrows down his position.
Somebody's got eyeballs on the house, and next thing you know, a kid starts walking down the street. And sure enough, it was Arnell Yearwood. And he was 5'1", 120 pounds, soaking wet, wearing winter clothes. Looked like a kid.
No one expected this.
We scooped him up, and we took him back to the office. He was nonchalant. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't think I was there then.
Detectives push harder, knowing they need to get a DNA sample from Arnell to compare to the crime scene.
He did consent, but after we took his DNA, he stopped talking. My boss called me at 7 o'clock that night and said, "It's him."
On April 7th, 2012, police arrest Arnell Yearwood for the murder of Diane Zaleski.
He was charged and brought back to the homicide task force and questioned again.
This time, Arnell starts talking, and investigators can now piece together what happened the night of Diane's murder.
She let him in based on the fact that he was a neighbor.
He did small chores for Diane. The garbage, minor painting, cleaning around the house. He entered the house to collect money.
Diane looked at him as the nice neighbor kid that she was trying to help. He knocked on her door that night and she let him in because she thought he was harmless. He wanted a romantic relationship and things went bad, and he did not take kindly to being rejected.
She told him to get out, and that's when he said he took a pair of scissors and he started stabbing her. In the entrance right at the front door, that's where the first attack occurred. After he had her down on the ground, he was strangling her he dragged her down the stairs and left her body dead at the bottom of the stairs. And then he went about his cleanup, and cleanup of him, the cleanup of her, and his pornography watching. And at some point he made himself something to eat.
But why would this kid brutally murder this vivacious woman?
The killer never talked about a motive, ever. And to prove a murder, you don't have to prove motive. We never identified what a motive was.
Whatever it was that caused him to act the way he did, so viciously, it will never be explained.
In court, Arnell Yearwood pleads guilty to the murder of Diane Zaleski. He is sentenced to 30 years in prison.
Oh, he was just a monster. I was disappointed, but I guess that's the maximum you can get. At least there was some accountability, because she deserved that. Her family deserved that.
The family made up black bracelets with white lettering that said "Justice for Diane, November 18th, 2010, which was the date she was murdered. And I wore that bracelet up until the day he pled guilty in court and went to jail. 2.5 years I wore that, and I didn't take it off.
Losing Diane is like a moment in life, like before Diane and after Diane. It's been quite a few years since she's gone, but I do still miss her. Her heart is still with me. She was so real and very kind, and she was funny. And every once in a while, I could feel her. I could feel her presence. And I think I look forward to seeing her someday again.